partners, and supporters. During the past few years, governments of developing countries, even across the MENA region, started to invest heavily in diversification, local talent, innovation, and entrepreneurship initiatives. However, the challenges cannot be understated. I'm Yara Asmar, my co-host Philippe Abouzed, and this is MENA on the Map. Today I would like to welcome a very special guest and very special friend of the foundation, Joseph Lynch, author, political entrepreneur, and managing partner of the Innovation and Politics Institute Germany. Joseph, it's good to have you with us today, and welcome to the third episode of MENA on the Map.
Hello, Yara. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
We're happy that you joined us. And it's important to mention that you were the founding director of NEOS, a political startup that stemmed out of it an unconventional liberal party in Austria. And in 2018, Springer published your book on political entrepreneurship entitled Political Entrepreneurship: How to Build Successful Centrist Political Startups.
Hello, Joseph. As announced, our episode today will focus on the future of work. What's at stake? What shall we address when we talk about new work? For example, skills, culture, market, interconnectivity, civil rights. We will discuss those different aspects along our interview. But before I start, I want to point that something intrigued my curiosity about your career path. You are a political entrepreneur. So what is a political entrepreneur? And focusing on the emerging future possessions, could you tell us, professions, could you tell us what does it mean to be a political entrepreneur?
Thank you, Philip. So to me, political entrepreneurship is approaching politics and political challenges and policy challenges with an entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurial tools. So of course, entrepreneurship has been there for quite a long time. And about 30 years ago, something new started to happen. People started to address social challenges with entrepreneurial tools and entrepreneurial mindsets. And so social entrepreneurship was born. Organizations like Ashoka, like the Impact Hub, and many others are now working in the social sphere and trying to develop business models that can help a lot of people and raise equality for all and so on. So that's something that for the last 30 years has been really successful. And what I've tried to show through my work and in my book, and also, of course, which we tried to do with NEOS in Austria, is that you can also apply those entrepreneurial tools and mindsets to political challenges. Now, you could argue that many of the most successful political entrepreneurs who have founded new political parties and disrupted political systems across the world of the last years, many of those have been populists and extremists, unfortunately. So what I'm interested in are those people in the center who try to counter those populists and extremists and try to build new political parties from the center left to the center right, liberal, Greens, who try to really do things differently and try to offer constructive alternatives to the governments that they face.
Can we say political entrepreneurship is something between political activism and political parties?
Approach. To me, political activism and political movements outside of parliaments are, of course, very, very important as an element of change. But of course, at some point, if you want to bring about systems change and not have a revolution, you need to bring about a change in law. And the thing to do that, of course, is to enter parliaments. And of course, in some countries that may be easier than in others. I just worked with political parties in sub-Saharan Africa, like in Uganda, for example, and I realize it's a really, really hard task if you get prosecuted, if you get oppressed, if people get even killed. That's a very, very hard thing to do. But the challenge is, of course, you need to bring about a change if you want to make things different through the law. and the best route to do that is to enter parliament. So yes, political activism has a role to play, and new political parties have a role to play, just as reformed political parties. My new book actually is on political entrepreneurship, which I'm working on at the moment, because we also need established parties to be changed for the better from within. And I'm looking at those people who try to innovate those political parties as political entrepreneurs who work together with political entrepreneurs.
Thank you.
Maybe when you're done with the book, we can discuss it even more. Hopefully, we'll also be having MENA on the map, and like do kind of an analysis of like the political culture in the MENA. But there's something very important that you mentioned, Joseph, which is like the new professions, including being a political entrepreneur, is about adapting to changes. Now with like the COVID-19 situation, like we observed something very simple. Like we saw that people who are locked down in their place, they're using now different tools to actually address business. So, for example, in the MENA region, statistics showed that usage of WhatsApp increased by 40%, and the number of hours that people spend on the internet like doubled and tripled only for business purposes. So my question is very simple. Do you think that Corona came to actually facilitate this transition from like the traditional way of working to a more technological approach to work? And like, you know, especially in developing countries where economies are very dependent on like the old way of thinking. Do you think Corona came to facilitate this transition, digitalize our economies without even governments wanting that?
First of all, a few words of caution. Of course, we are all looking into a big glass bubble at the moment because this crisis is still developing. And I think it's fair to say Bill Gates just wrote in The Economist that we're, you know, at maximum a third through the crisis. So in many countries, the curves are going down, which is good. But we know that the virus will stay with us. And so now we are looking into the economies that are under lockdown at the moment. We're now reopening, and here in Germany slowly. In other countries, it's still under lockdown. So we don't, you know, we don't really know what will happen. But what we can perhaps expect, as you say, and what we're already seeing, is that that Corona is that the crisis is incentivizing a lot of decentralized peripheral innovation, because people who are self-employed, small businesses, they need to come up with creative solutions, and even bigger ones, bigger businesses, they start suddenly to digitize, up to even governments, things that have been in the development and perhaps on hold for years, suddenly now are rolled out in months or even weeks because it's necessary. There's a great quote from Gary Hamel, a leadership and innovation expert, that says, in a small crisis, power moves to the center. In a big one, it moves to the periphery. So I think what we can see is that as the Corona crisis is a real big crisis on a lot of levels. So of course, it's not only health, it's also education, it's also business. It's on every level. It touches, you know, how we work as a society, how we live as individuals. I think this then leads to the development that in the periphery, and this is, you know, all the new always emerges in the periphery, that a lot of small things start to happen, and not all of them are revolutionary, and not all of them are ingenious, but many little things are happening. People try out things, as you said, they use WhatsApp, they start repurposing platforms for other uses, and that's a lot of stuff that bubbles to the surface, and that then may lead to a bigger change, which we don't see yet and don't know yet. But yes, that's something that might be underway, and of course, that's also very interesting in the MENA region.
Joseph, away from the Corona discussion, the fourth industrial revolution presented challenges to the workforce in developing countries. It caused, for instance, in Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq, disruption to many occupations, which led to socio-economic imbalances. In your opinion, what is needed on the policy level to avoid kicking out people, laying off people from the market game? What should be the policy agenda on this level?
So yes, I mean I've talked about the opportunities. I think it's very very clear that the coronavirus crisis also poses a huge challenge for the MENA region. Even more so, of course, if you're an oil producing country, you have the double whammy of a drop in domestic demand, a loss a loss in tourism and so on, but also a collapse in oil prices. If we think about countries like Saudi Arabia. But even if you don't, I think you have in almost all of those countries, you have very big public sectors that employ a lot of people and not necessarily high productivity. So I can see that as you said, the fourth industrial revolution put people out of their traditional jobs. And now, of course, there's a big reset undergoing, which we cannot still see yet see the end. But I think it's pretty clear that this boost in digitization that we're currently seeing is, while it is a reset for everyone, I think, of course, it's easier to facilitate for countries that have a more highly skilled workforce, that have a more, a higher participation rate, for example, in the labor market of women and so on. So I think if you have more inequality, as many MENA countries do, also in terms of skills, I think it will be very hard because budgets, of course, state budgets will be hit. Businesses will need to be helped, as many countries do. But of course, if you don't have necessarily the deep coffers to help your people and help the businesses through the crisis, it may hit you quite hard. So what could be policies? Of course, in terms of upskilling, certainly it would help to upskill broad segments of the population in digital skills. Of course, it will help to have policies that increase the participation of women in the labor market. So of course, in a lot of countries, liberalizing and upskilling might be helpful. Being aware that in many places won't necessarily happen, but I think we have a lot of destabilizing factors, as I outlined before. Unfortunately, we also have a lot of stabilizing factors where governments are being helped by the current situation and being put in stronger position and actually increasing their control over people. So of course, those factors are battling with each other. We don't yet see what the outcome will be, but I think the battle itself will be interesting to play out over the next months.
So if we jump to the center, I would like to go back to the periphery and to talk a bit about countries like in MENA region, not only in the Levant area like Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon, but also in North Africa, including Tunisia, Morocco. Not to talk about the situation in Libya that is devastating. Even if governments were able to develop policies that are more inclusive and more innovative to include everyone, we still have certain factors that hinder us, which is the political divisions in our countries, the weak policy enforcement mechanisms, and the inequality. Especially not all of the countries have they have a decentralized government. So in your opinion, what is the role of individuals and the civil society in enabling the workforce in parallel to the policy implementation of governments? Which kind of initiative we need to see more on the ground?
I think that, of course, civil society has a big role to play, and also local politics. We, from the Innovation Politics Institute, run a network. It's called the Now Mayors Network, also with lots of mayors in the MENA region. And there's a lot of great work happening on the ground, again, which you don't necessarily see because it's not necessarily big cities. It's sometimes medium-sized or even small towns where people try to help each other, be they politicians or civil society citizens. I think what we need to see more of of course, mutual help, is mutual upskilling in the community. Often it doesn't take a centralized approach, but a lot of stuff can happen in the communities and in the towns with a few laptops. You can easily organize a course. So those things, not necessarily expensive stuff, not necessarily high skilled stuff, but some basic digital literacy, 21st century skills. I think this can be, first of all, these initiatives need identifying, because often, as I said, they are under the radar. They need identifying, and then they need, I think, more a bigger platform. So they need showcasing as well, for others to learn, because often the central government, of course, doesn't play this role of helping necessarily the bottom up initiatives,
Yes.
because there may be vested interests. Empowering those people with some support that doesn't necessarily have to be much, I think, is what can happen, and what's already happening to a certain part, but what should happen more in the periphery, where this kind of new, is emerging, and the seeds of the future are.
Let's follow up more on the MENA mayor thing, like after the episode, so we can talk how we can cooperate on this level.
Joseph, allow me to focus a little bit on the role of education in our part of the world. What type of educational systems you believe we can install in developing countries, such as in the MENA, for example? And of course, you know that our part of the world is very young. There are more than 30% of the population between the age of 15 and 29, and youth unemployment averages hovering around 25%. Shall we focus, or shall the focus be more on vocational trainings, on knowledge-based skills, like practical things more than theoretical? What do you suggest on this matter?
Yes, so I think that vocational training and apprenticeships, those kinds of educational streams, have a lot going for them. Practical training, and basically give people skills that they can really quickly use in the work market. That said, of course, it's not even all around the world. It's not like that you train once in your life nowadays, and then you've trained forever. So that said, I think vocational training needs to change also in a way that it's a training which you undergo on a regular basis, and retrain after a particular amount of years, be it 5 years, be it 7 years, be it 10 years. But basically the idea, and that's also, as in Europe, in the US, everyone's struggling with that. But to implement this, kind of revisiting and retraining and reskilling over time, also in vocational training, I think is one key to success. The other, I would say, certainly, and as we're talking about political entrepreneurship, I think it's basically empowering people with training and courses around entrepreneurship. What does it mean to not only run your own, build your own business and run your own business, but entrepreneurship is of course much broader than that. Thinking for yourself, and finding creative solutions to problems that can, as I said, also apply to the social sphere, but it can also apply to the political sphere. Now, of course, there may be interested that are not supporting that, but again, that might be something that might be supported on the communal level and on the regional level. I think this kind of teaching people, coaching people to become entrepreneurs in their own, for their own good, and for their own lives, I think is something that can be really used in a lot of ways, and where there's a lot of potential also for countries in the MENA region.
Education might like will help definitely a lot, like this transformation in the workplace and in the work market and even culture in the MENA region. However, we're still like as like many of developing countries receptive. Like we still like receive new skills, we still receive new technologies. What do you think is like what kind of bridge we need to create in order to also produce, in order to also like export like technologies to like the developed countries, if you want to keep this kind of categorization?
Of course, trade and investment has a role to play, and of course, if you want to learn also from others and with others, what they foreign investors and partners will look at and will value is if their investment, of course, is safe, if they know what to expect, and of course, the cronyism that's still prevalent in many MENA countries and in political systems is a problem that needs to be addressed. And of course, that's hard and tough, and often it's very much ingrained in the political elites. But still, of course, if you want to work with partners internationally and also from learn from the technology and so on, that's something to look at. And on the other hand, of course, international investors also should look at investing into new sectors that perhaps don't have the vested interest and the cronyism that others might have. Could be, for example, export-oriented agriculture, assembly-type manufacturing, those kinds of sectors. There it's easier to establish those partnerships that are a genuine win-win for both sides.
Thank you, Joseph. What frameworks are required to sustain the momentum of the innovation revolution that is taking place, and to ensure entrepreneurs have the tools they need to succeed in a competitive market, in your opinion?
So for entrepreneurs to succeed, they need freedom. They need freedom really as much as possible. Freedom of a business, but more than that, of course, freedom of speech, freedom of free thinking, freedom of assembly. All of that is crucial in terms of those human rights are the basis for entrepreneurial actions. If you don't have them, if you cannot think freely, act freely, speak freely, mobilize freely, for non-political purposes, but just because you wanna find out how the next business idea, how the next unicorn will operate. I think all of that is really, really crucial. And just like as I mentioned before, the participation of women in the workforce, if you have a lot of people in the economy not participating in the workforce, of course, you don't have access to their ideas and to their engagement. So that's a big problem, and that hurts economic growth, and that hurts, of course, entrepreneurs most who are at the forefront of developing economic growth.
This take me to like the case of Saudi Arabia. Like we all know about the Saudi 2030 vision, like that aims at shifting the country, shifting the economy of country from being like an oil-based economy to a more diversified economy. Like I've been like reading a lot about like the different aspects of this vision 2030, and it was surprising for me to see that I want to say the authorities or whoever wrote these papers basically acknowledged that innovation led to kind of a socio-cultural change within societies, and we need to acknowledge this. While at the same time, if we go for and see the practices, we see that we still have like high human rights infringement in Saudi Arabia. Women still do not have their complete civil rights. We do not have like a democratic system that acknowledges citizens and like create a healthy environment for citizenship. So do you think under all of these conditions and with all the money that is put in Vision 2030, Saudis will be able to attain where they want to be? Like going back to like the framework that you gave, which is based on freedom.
So if you look through the Saudi Arabia Vision 2030, I think what you won't find, as you mentioned, is the whole idea of increasing, broadening, rolling out human rights, civil rights more than in the past. A lot of it is about the economy
Yeah.
and a creative vision for the country. Very little to nothing is about how can citizens be more empowered and the rights more respected than in the past. I think what we already can see, I mentioned in the beginning, is that an economy like the one of Saudi Arabia, which is highly dependent on the oil price, is hit very hard by the current collapse in oil price. And again, we're not at the end of this story, but there's a big shift going on, which already has been, of course, going on through the change from the shift from fossil oils to sustainable resources. But of course, this shift has now been very much accelerated by the current situation, and the demand has been very much depressed. So the Saudis have been very engaged in protecting their interests around the world. But I think it's pretty clear already that Saudi Arabia will have a hard time in realizing, even from an economic point of view, their Saudi Vision 2030. And so, therefore, again, it will be interesting to see whether the periphery will be strengthened also in a country like Saudi Arabia, and what this does to the internal power equation. But it will be also very interesting to look at the external power equation. Of course, the negotiations with Russia and the US have already been going on. But I think the one, of course, country, particularly right now, to look at is China, and what their influence will be, and how they will come out of the crisis. At the moment, it looks like they will actually surprisingly come out pretty well and pretty powerful and quicker than many of or a few of the other big players that are in the field. And that, of course, again, is a question mark for Saudi Arabia. So I would expect a lot of shuffling and a lot of adapting in the next weeks in Saudi Arabia, trying to adapt to the current situation, which will not be easy for them.
Just also to like mention another point that you talked about, which is like the woman participation in business. Like it's obvious that women should be more empowered, but why? What are the reasons? Do you think that having more women in business is basically will create a more fertile land for innovation and development and progress?
Look at you.
I think that economic point of view, it's really easy. I mean, the more people you have in a market acting as free agents and trying to find ways to innovate things and build new businesses, the more people you have, the better, really. And of course, if you exclude either legally or culturally or by any other means, if you exclude a large part of the workforce, that cannot be good for economies, and you basically deprive yourself of a large brain pool if you don't educate them as well as males, if you don't let them found new business. So I think it's less a question of sex. It's just a question of that you shouldn't exclude anyone, really, because it's a question of from an economic point of view, the more the merrier. Of course, it's also a human rights and a civil rights question. But even if you don't regard that, it takes every year a few points of the growth curve of the country, and therefore it could more equality for all is also, of course, more welfare for all.
Difficult milestones then for Saudi Arabia in this sense.
Joseph, allow me, since you were discussing a little bit on Saudi Arabia and the Gulf region, many countries depend on oil and they consider it to be their black gold. Now, with the crisis in this field, do you think there should be a shift in their economies, in the way to see things, in the way to invest in the future? Should renewable energy be the alternative? Should maybe startups, maybe technologies? Where do you see the Arab countries going to when it comes to new fields of work? Since we started our discussion talking about new work.
I think that there's a saying from William Gibson: the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. So if we look at a country like Saudi Arabia, but also others, of course, the future has already been here for a while. They already have started investing in a lot of new technology businesses. They've started investing in new energies. So it's not that they haven't seen this coming. I think they were surprised, like everyone else, of the impact and of the speed, and therefore a lot of economies that are highly dependent on oil still and would have expected to be for at least for a few years to come dependent on oil. I think they will have a fairly rough transition, and of course that's also a worrying part of the whole thing, because that might lead to unrests and revolutions and all kinds of things. And let's hope there's a peaceful transition to a freer world. But I think yes, absolutely, those countries should now speed up and adapt their transition to new technologies, to sustainable energies. I think there's a chance now to learn from each other and to exchange experiences and technologies on a global level. I think, of course, the power plays and power games may stand against that. But I think what's also emerging in this crisis, really, with all the people, with basically 3/4 of the world population at home, is this kind of global civil society, global connection between people. We mentioned WhatsApp, we mentioned Zoom, which we're on at the moment. There are many other tools, social media, where this has already been happening. So I think there's a genuine possibility, again, not looking at governments, but looking at the people in those countries, and looking at the businesses to really learn from each other, connect, and drive this change that is so necessarily needed.
Finally, from my side, to wrap up the discussion with a positive maybe remark, how do you see the world overcoming the post-corona period? Do you believe we can recover soon? I mean, this coronavirus like unified the whole world and under one challenge, which is creating or continuing to survive, to create jobs, to fight unemployment. The challenges are big. Do you see us as one overcoming this easily?
I think there's no question it will be hard. And as I said in the beginning, I don't have a glass bubble, unfortunately, so nobody knows really. I think the challenge is that we've gone into this crisis, from a kind of global point of view, pretty, disciplined and unified. I think more so than many would have expected in lots of countries where people actually really have adapted quite well. I think we will see quite a change in the coming months, because now the lockdowns are being lifted. We will see the hits the economies have taken. Quite a lot of business will go out of the market in many countries. So there will be a fallout. And I think the question will be, how will this fallout in each country be managed? How many jobs will be lost? How quickly will we recover? I think it's emerging that this recovery will take really a few years. And this is, of course, also an opportunity to reconstruct some things in the economy in a different way than before. But for the time being, economies will go through a recession. There will be depressions as well that may take more than just a year. That won't be comfortable and won't be easy. It will be a huge challenge for MENA countries that don't have the opportunities or resources, perhaps, to fund their businesses for a long time in a big way. It will hit small business owners, self-employed people, as it has in Europe and other parts of the world. So there, it will be very, very tough. But we should also look for the silver linings, and that is that such a crisis offers also opportunities to innovate, and again look at the periphery and the things and the stuff that's happening not in the center, but in the localities, in the towns, things people, civil society does. I think that's a real opportunity that we should pursue.
On that note, also, and before ending with you, Joseph, I would like to proudly announce that we're taking advantage of these kind of opportunities that are out there even after Corona. And we are launching now in MENA on the Map officially the partnership between the Innovation in Politics Institute and Friedrich Naumann Foundation MENA office on a very nice project, I Values Rethink Politics in MENA, which is a competition that goes like cross-regional and enable all our partners and individuals to come up with creative ideas to overcome the different challenges that Corona brought to us in terms of democratic challenges, health challenges, economic challenges, and so on. So I'm so happy, Joseph, that we'll be working on this project together. And I'm so looking forward to amazing ideas coming out of this region.
We're also very happy for this cooperation. Very much looking forward to doing that. I think it's a great partnership, and it's a very exciting project that we are eager to launch together with you.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for joining us today and for taking part in MENA on the Map. Hopefully to see you soon physically in MENA and not only over Zoom.
Thank you, Yara. Thank you, Philip. It's been a pleasure being with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you and stay safe.
Bye.